Peace. I am Allah Forever, the owner and creator of the online baby store, babybeautiful.co. This is another one of the videos that is coming out of a series of videos that I'm doing to get the message out about the store online and to get people to start becoming a part of being customers to the store. Now, I spoke last week in the video that was another part of the series of videos about issues that pertain directly to the babies, because each video in that series is going to be dealing with the babies. And the motto that I have is save the babies, they're the greatest. That is something that comes from a long history and tradition dealing with my way of life. So the man who established my way of life gave us one mission. He said, save the babies, they are the greatest. So I've used that as the motto in dealing with the series of videos that I'm starting. Now, I want to start off this week with something that deals directly with all of what I'm speaking about. And it's a video that a brother came out with called 7 a.m. And after that, I'm going to go more into my presentation. So I'm going to put that on now, where you will get an opportunity to hear some of the things that I will be dealing with in a series of videos. I've already spoken about it last week in ending that video. This week, I want to continue with that. So it's going to start right now. After it, I will deal with the issues that pertain to that, as well as the online baby store.
I was born and raised in Shreveport, a mid-sized city in the northwest corner of the state of Louisiana. All my life, I've witnessed as the situation for black people in America has deteriorated. Unemployment, crime, drugs, lack of housing, and everyone has their own ideas as to why this is. But after decades of research, I can report to you confidently that it has nothing to do with your level of education. It has nothing to do with social policy. It has nothing to do with the media or your lack of proper religion. Every major problem black people have in America can be directly traced back to our lack of money. And this is the plague of our people. There's just one question that matters more than any other for black people, and I undertook this documentary because I've been driven my entire life to find the answer to one question. Why are we the poorest people in the United States? My journey to find answers to this question took me across the country to speak to the most relevant minds on this subject. I started out with one set of beliefs, but I returned home with a whole new set of facts. We are the poorest people in America because we shop and work at other people's businesses, but we don't own any of our own. Businesses are where all money and wealth come from. There is no path to wealth for the employee, only for the employer. After completing this journey, I'm now more convinced than ever that the answer to fixing our problem begins every morning with everything we do after 7 a.m. We live in a world that runs on money. It controls everything around you and determines your ability to even survive. The key to financial wealth isn't just having a job. The keys to wealth are the businesses you own and the assets you control. Black people haven't made any progress in the assets we own and control since we were on the plantations, and as a result, we are the most impoverished people on earth.
It was exactly where we were in 1860, on the eve of the Civil War. At that particular time, you had about 187,000 blacks who were supposedly free out of almost 5 million. Those 187,000 blacks had successfully accumulated about 1/2 of 1% of the nation's wealth. And here we are, 147 years later, we still own and control about 1/2 of 1% of the nation's wealth, of the richest nation on earth. And even in comparative terms, the same thing is true with Blacks International, where Black Folk International make up about 25% of the world's population. And out of over $300 trillion worth of wealth, Black folk own and control less than 1/2 of 1% of the world's wealth. And it's not social integration, not civil rights that determines your opportunities, your equal opportunities, or your competitiveness. It's what you own and control in terms of vital resources. That's what determines what you're going to get in this world.
I almost ran for mayor of Washington, D.C. in 2010. And part of what inspired me to consider running was I looked at some statistics on poverty in America. And I found that Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, majority African American city, had the second highest poverty rate in America. Okay? Now, the highest poverty rate was Mississippi. Now, at the same hand, it had the lowest unemployment rate in the country. So I said, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So I looked, and I realized that 21% of all Washington, D.C. residents lived in poverty. 45% of every African American child in that city was growing up in poverty. Almost 40% of every African American citizen in that city was living in poverty. So you look at those statistics and you say, what in the world is going on here? Lack of economic opportunity. So we're where we are today because we have the entrepreneurial spirit has been taken away from us.
Even as we look at, we have this African American president, and people would like to think that we have arrived. We have not, because we still fall on the shorter end of things when you talk about education, you talk about economic development, business opportunities, business growth, small business development. All of those things the African American community still is not seeing the full fruition of.
When you don't own businesses, your people are poor, and the cost of poverty impacts every other avenue of life.
We study this in psychology. Crime is a function of education and employment. Whenever you look at crime, you look at the educational index, you look at the employment index. Right now in America, half of the African American men in Philadelphia is unemployed. Half the African American men in Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, New York City. When you look at most of the major cities, our men are unemployed. You cannot keep the unemployment rate out of the discussion of crime.
One thing that I told my sons, and I raised them in urban communities that weren't the best. No excuses. Nobody cares that you don't have a father. Nobody cares that you're being raised by a single teenage mom. Nobody cares about that. You need to go to school and do what you have to do, because what they have for you and your excuses are graves and jail cells.
And why do we need our people to be self-sufficient? Because when you're not self-sufficient, you can't speak your mind. One of the biggest reasons why black people have been so cowardly in the post-civil rights movement, not standing up for ourselves, standing up for our children, standing up against police brutality, we're scared to lose our jobs. We have to work. We got kids. I can't talk about the racism on my job. I might lose it. So the reason why we're not speaking our mind is because we don't have economic freedom.
Wealth is defined as intergenerational. If you can't pass it on, then it's not wealth. Building wealth is already difficult, but it's practically impossible when your parents didn't leave anything for you to build it with. When most non-black people die, they pass on assets to their children. But when black people die, they only pass on poverty.
If you don't have any wealth, what are you passing on? Look, see, we've spent most of our lives focusing politically on things that are non-inheritable. See, when the civil rights movement started, what did your generation focus on? You focused on welfare, food stamp, public housing, okay, civil rights, social integration, preferential treatment, getting a job. How do you inherit those things? What is there to inherit? Nick said, well, we got civil rights. You got a civil rights right now to go down to a hotel, to the richest hotel, and go get the most expensive room, have lobster fed to you every day. But if you don't have the money, you cannot do it.
And as you know, an African-American teenager has the most difficult job in America of anyone in finding employment. The businesses of America would rather hire a child who doesn't even speak English before they hire an African-American youth because of the negative stereotypes and stigmatisms that even we, as African-American, have put forth about our own children.
Let's look at the numbers. Black people are 13% of the American population, yet we own 1/3 of 1% of the world's wealth. This number is projected to grow only slightly, even for the next decade. The annual census report in 2012 states that the average white person's income was $30,114. The average black person's income was $18,648, nearly half what the average white person makes. As bad as the personal income situation is, the picture gets even more grim when we analyze wealth. According to an Insight Center for Community Economic Development study, the median wealth for white men in America is $43,800, but the median wealth for black men is $7,900, and the median wealth for black women is only $100. A Pew Research report in 2011 also reported on the black wealth gap in America based on, at the time, newly released government data, which showed that in 2005, the net worth of black households was at $12,124. This had collapsed by 2009 to $5,677, a fall of 53% in only 4 years. The report found that a major reason blacks lag behind whites so much when it comes to wealth is because 24% of black people don't have assets of any kind other than a car.
See, one of our biggest problems as a people is we tend to confuse wealth with money, cash with capital. The only thing you can do with money is give it away. Our black athletes and our rappers, you know what they do? They spend most of their money on what? Things that depreciate with value. Cars and clothes and chains. 10 years from now, that car isn't worth anything. 10 years from now, that clothes you bought isn't worth anything. You look at other folks, what do they spend their money on? Land and property, international business. They invest in resources. So even when their cash disappears, guess what? They still have millions of dollars of income. Okay, or millions of dollars of residual unearned income in their investments, which is why I argue that there's no such thing as a black middle class. That does not exist. Class relates to ownership of wealth. Class is ownership of wealth.
While these mainstream organizations are great places to be and can be great places to be and are viable entities, you know, it's about ownership of assets. And that's really the issue. That's an area where I think that whether we're talking media, whether we're talking sports, whether we're talking almost any music, almost anything that we as African Americans are involved in, we fall very short when it comes to an understanding ownership of assets. And that's where real wealth is created. And that's where real power is created.
I've spent my entire adult life studying this, and I can tell you the primary reason black people are poor and have no assets is our lack of businesses. Businesses are crucial because businesses are where all capital originates. Business is the source that all governments and citizens get their money from. According to the 2010 census, there were 1.9 million black businesses in the U.S. Most had sprung up over the course of a few years. This may sound impressive, but that changes when you realize that the failure rate for black businesses can be well over 60%. This means that out of a population of about 40 million people, our business ownership rate hovers at around 2% or less. And this shortage of black businesses makes us the single largest consumer class in America. We buy everything, but we own nothing.
Don't confuse consumer power as being a power. You should be asking just a question: what can you produce? It's what you produce that makes determine whether or not you're successful, not what you can buy. What can you produce? You live in a society that's based on production. That's what determines your value. What do you produce? We live in a society where black folk are zero producers. Zero producers and 100% consumers. And consumerism comes from the word to consume. To consume means to be eaten up and wasted away. Consuming is a death knell. And when a black person were to tell me that, so look, I go buy cell phones and Mercedes and put big $500 rims on a van. That's not a positive to me. That's a negative.
Because of desegregation, black people felt we no longer needed to provide our own goods and services because now white society would be obligated to give us theirs. The flip side of this delusion was that we no longer needed to provide our own jobs because now white society would be obligated to give us theirs. And this misconception has been the biggest reason that black unemployment has remained stubbornly high.
Economics is largely controlled along ethnic lines. If you look at Asian American businesses, if you look at Hispanic American businesses, if you look at European American business, East Indian American businesses, Arab American businesses, they are largely family-based, and when they have to go out and hire other people, they try to keep it within the ethnic group that they belong to. Everyone protects their business by their ethnicity, so their identity becomes a weapon of economic protection and success.
This has a lot to do with the reason I'm here. And that is, not only have I worked at these places, whether it's Bloomberg or New York Times or Wall Street Journal, but I also spent many years covering the industry. I look at these companies, and the reason I start off talking about covering these companies, almost always, I look at the boards of all these companies, right? I always do. I look at the senior management at all these companies. I can tell you right now, go online and look at the mainstream media companies. That most of them have pictures of their senior management. Just take a look and then compare what that senior management looks like to what the consumer base looks like. It's starkly different.
One of the most commonly cited examples of black economic power is the Black Wall Street. While most people talk about the Black Wall Street of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the reality is that there were several locations around the country at this time that were designated as a Black Wall Street. But the shame of the Black Wall Street is that black people were willing to march and protest and die to integrate, but we weren't willing to do the same thing to rebuild all the Black Wall Streets around America. Instead, we focused on jobs. But the problem with simply having a job is that a job is not an asset. A job is simply the bottom rung of the economic ladder. Since the cotton fields, black people have been primarily concerned with finding work, all the while refusing to accept that no one ever got rich working for a living. In order to understand how we get out of this, you first have to understand how we got into this, and most importantly, why we were made into the poorest people in America. It begins with the European worldwide expansion that was the driving force behind the slave trade, which claimed the lives of countless millions of Africans. While the world rightfully focuses on the cost and misery, suffering, and death in regard to slavery, the world, and black people in particular, have lost sight of the fact that slavery was primarily an economic strategy intended to enrich a few nations at the expense of African peoples. The social damage of slavery was tremendous, but it's the economic legacy of slavery that haunts us to this very day.
Economically, the worst part of it was that, as I said, it generated a new form of business operations in the world. Prior to slavery, the operating intersection, the interaction of capital and money in the world and business transactions was called mercantilism. Let's go back to 1441 when Henry the Navigator went around the coast of Africa and picked up about 16 blacks and brought them back and gave them to the Pope in Italy. And the Pope began to use these blacks as slaves and used them very, very successfully and used them as a labor class. And then Pope Innocent came out and says, hey, this is a good thing. So after Columbus discovered America, they let everybody start getting blacks and use them as slaves. And so then they started going out to Africa and to explore the opportunity to use blacks as slaves. So in the 1500s, all of Europe was being devastated. Europe was a devastated continent. It was racked with poverty, criminal behavior, famine, starvation, and everything else. It was a decimated continent. And so in the 1500s, they started going after Columbus supposedly discovered America, started going to Africa, picking up all these slaves based on what Pope Innocent had said. And they started paying about $25 a piece for each one that they picked up. And they used a new system from the capitalism that formed, that overruled, that's replaced mercantilism, and says now if I pay $25 for something, I'm going to have to get an appreciated profit off it, like 1,500%. And they started taking those blacks and selling them around the world for like about $300 or $400 a piece. And so what that did is that a race started, RACE started, where all these major countries around the world started in Europe, started capitalizing and building money and wealth off of black folk, off their labor and their resources they was extracting out of Africa. Now, while they were doing all that, everybody was getting rich, and black labor was enriching everybody on earth. Black people were making every continent on earth rich. That was about 9 European nations. Also, the Asians were also enslaving black folk. And we got in this country, American Indians started enslaving black folk. Everybody's got rich off of black folk. And this race went on up until about 1859. But during that course, every continent got rich in building the Western world, Latin America, South America, North America. Everybody got rich and began to acquire almost 99% of all the resources and all the wealth, except black folk. Black folk were in a ditch. In 1859, by 1860, when the Civil War started, they said the race was over, the contest was over, and let nothing change now. That all the dominant societies controlled and owned all the resources, money, and wealth. Blacks who were in the ditch owned nothing.
We look back historically, we go back 100 years, 200 years. You look at the level of oppression that we endured, that our ancestors endured, and the barriers that were imposed even after slavery, the barriers that were imposed upon us in terms of access to opportunity, access to education, access to equal housing, access to a place to live, access to accommodations. And so those barriers imposed several long-term impacts on us, lack of long-term perpetual opportunity, so that put us in the spiral of perpetual economic turmoil.
The problem at the end of slavery, despite African Americans having skills that they could have used to build an independent reality, they still needed access to resources in order to be able to do that. So I may have been a carpenter, I may have been a printer, I may have been a bricklayer, I may have been a mason, but guess what? If I don't have access to resources for me to start my own business, then it's going to be difficult for me to do so.
Slavery and its successor, the Jim Crow era, and all its subsequent laws forced black people into a state of abject poverty and kept them there. It stole wealth in the form of labor and resources from black people and gave it to white men. This unfair economic advantage created the world's richest nation, who constructed a system of white male privilege designed to give white men permanent generational wealth and access to capital, while making sure black people were permanently poor and destitute. This was the purpose and reason for slavery. As long as we don't own businesses, then we don't control the earth's resources. And as long as blacks don't control any resources, then white privilege is maintained. Black people are eternal victims of racism, but we fail to break its grip on us because we don't understand what it is, what it does, and why it was brought into existence.
Race is a contest, just like in a bicycle race, automobile race. Race is a contest where people are competing. Groups is a group concept. People competing to get from here to there. Whoever gets there first, the most wins.
You got to look at this as the Indianapolis 500. Now, imagine, somebody starting a race on lap 300, and somebody else starting the race on lap 50. It would take a Herculean effort for that person starting off at 50. They'd have to also have the other person in front who's at lap 300 have a flat tire, have some other car problem, and so forth, to catch that person. And still, that person has such a big lead, it's almost impossible to catch it unless that person gets out of the race. And that person's not going to get out of the race. So the challenge that we have to have is that, okay, now we're all driving cars that are similar speed, but still, if you're getting a better education and you're getting, better access to capital and so forth, you're driving a better car. And so even if there are no roadblocks, you're about driving a better car.
When the race was over, then they took the E off of race and stuck ISM, which meant racism, which means maintain the status quo. A suffix stuck on the end of race is maintain the status quo. Blacks got nothing, everybody else got something. And so consequently, when racism then became a definition of saying don't let anything move from the hands of those who got all the power and the wealth and resources over a 300-year period, let none of that move into the hands of black folk. And the dominant society said, therefore, we're going to be against affirmative action, preferential treatment, set aside, anything that will move wealth and resources into the hands of black folk. That's what racism is. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people who are competing for the ownership and control of resources. It has nothing to do with, has absolutely nothing to do with prejudice, has nothing to do with discrimination, has nothing to do with bias. But somehow our leaders, as a result of that, have been misled in believing that those terms are synonymous, and people get away with using them. They somehow pretend that racism is no different from prejudice, bigotry, and hatred, and they're all the same. They're not. And they say racism was an economic issue. It's always been an economic issue. It's not a social issue. It's not a political issue. It's an economic issue. And until black folk come to understand that, they'll always be at the bottom of the barrel. That's the one thing they never learned, and that's what's been keeping us at the bottom of the barrel. We don't understand the nature of racism. We don't understand the nature of how all the resources got maldistributed.
If you want to see what black economic empowerment is capable of, according to the FedPartnership.gov website, between the years 1888 and 1934, 134 black banks were created in the United States. And from 1867 through 1917, the number of black businesses increased from 4,000 to 50,000. As of the third quarter of 2014, there were only 25 black-owned banks still operating in the United States. In comparison, there are 30 Hispanic-owned banks and almost 80 Asian-owned banks. According to Forbes magazine, there are over 1,600 billionaires on Earth today, but only 9 of those people are black. This despite our being 25% of the world's population. Black people have always known that white privilege was a problem, and so black people turned to political action to level the playing field. But political action has failed to be a solution. This is because, like racism, black people do not understand what politics is, and like racism, politics is about wealth.
You have the mayor, you have your city council people, you have your state representatives. You have these individuals who really do want to make an impact. It's just, what do you address first? So do you lay off the firefighters, or do you lay off the police force? Do you close the schools, or do you keep the schools open and continue to have them underperform and hope for the best? Because Either we lay off, we close schools, or we close down the whole school district. What do you do? Who do you please? What's the best way to address it? And then when you make that decision, you'll get backlash because you're not fixing someone else's issue.
Politics is a process that decides who gets what benefits out of life. It decides whose water can be collected. It determines what's going to happen. And the whole purpose of politics is to help maintain the wealth. Politics is a tool, an instrument that's used by the wealthy class, or the economic class, to control and monitor and restrain or compliment or reward other people.
Far from giving us socioeconomic power, our reliance on politics without economics has created a political landscape where even the very black politicians we vote for refuse to stand up for or even speak on black issues.
With the black politician, because they're financed by white people, okay, they're not able to do the bidding of the black community. Michael Nutter, even if he wanted to do what was in the best interest of blacks, he couldn't because he doesn't have a black power base. His power base is white. We don't have a lump sum of money, nor do we have an organized political action committee where if they attacked Mayor Nutter, we could go out and defend him in the newspapers and pay for advertising to defend him. You got to have a black power base to do the bidding of black people. We want black people to get into office on white money and then do black people's business. It's not going to happen.
And politics, as I said, is a process that decides who get what benefits. It's based on the premise of quid pro quo, something for something. One hand washes the other. If I put a person in a political office and vote for him, he's supposed to owe me. When you go into a public office, the first thing you must learn to do is dance with the person who brought you to the party. If black folk put you in an office, and you come from a black district, your first obligation is to take care of those black people that put you in office.
When the last mayor, Fenty, who I was going to run against, when he got defeated, was saying that when they asked him, what do you think about African Americans losing opportunity in the city, he stopped the report. Said, hold it. When you start talking race, that's when you get into trouble. We got to just all be equal. Well, we're not all equal. He's in a city, he was presiding over in a city where 45% of all black people in the city was living in poverty. That's a problem. You got to acknowledge that. So I think the challenge again is our elected officials. Who are we electing now? And are we electing people who now see themselves as trying to prove to the overall establishment that they're going to treat everybody equally? Yeah, we treat everybody equally, but we got to create opportunities. Got to rebalance the scales. The scales have all this gold here and empty here. And so we need to make the scale start going here. So they hover like this. But that means you got to put more weight, more gold here to balance it out. You can't do that with blindness.
We don't need black officials. We don't need them. We do not need a black face in a high place. We need black political power. Chain our votes together. If you don't chain your votes together, they don't work for you. The only black vote that matters is an organized black vote. If you vote your conscience and I'm voting my conscience and she's voting her conscience, at the end of the day, whoever wins doesn't have to be accountable to any of us because we were not organized before we voted. Politicians are not chosen by individuals. They're chosen by groups, and it's time for our group to take a stand.
In America, the result of white privilege has been black oppression, and the ultimate symbol of this is the American court system. Lynching, police brutality, and other threats to our lives from various forms of institutionalized racism made us scramble to politics for a remedy. Instead of giving us a panacea, things actually got worse. Black people widely supported President Bill Clinton after 12 years of Reaganomics and the war on drugs, which disproportionately targets blacks. But far from bringing us social justice, Bill Clinton went the opposite direction and spearheaded the most infamous and punitive mandatory minimum sentencing law in history.
3 strikes and you are out.
The notorious 3 Strikes Law. Barack Obama was even more heavily supported by blacks, receiving almost 100% of the black vote. And yet he has the distinction of being the U.S. president with the fewest commutations and pardons in modern history. Less than Bill Clinton. Less than even George W. Bush. Perhaps Perhaps the best example of the fallacy of believing that black numbers and votes will equal power is the city of Philadelphia, where some of the worst miscarriages of justice against black people have occurred while being presided over by black leaders.
Philadelphia is the only top 10 American city in terms of population and importance. Okay, because as you know, the Constitution was written here, Declaration of Independence, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and all lived here. Okay, it's the only top 10 city where the blacks equal or exceed the whites in terms of population. Which is to say, politically and economically speaking, if there's anyone who doesn't have an excuse for still being where they are, it's us. In Philadelphia, the white power structure controls the masses of black people through a group of hand-picked black people. Mayor Nutter is one. Our first mayor, Wilson Good, who actually dropped the bomb on Move. Okay, he was one. John Street, you know, he was one. So we had 3 black mayors. Nutter is the third. None of them really done anything for us.
Mayor Wilson Good and Move. 2 names linked in infamy. Wilson Good was elected the first black mayor of Philadelphia. He replaced Frank Rizzo, a white supremacist who left office openly calling for whites to take up arms against the black citizens of the city. In 1985, Philadelphia police were involved in their second standoff with Move members in 7 years, and the newly elected Mayor Good was determined for it to be the last. Even though they knew that Move members were barricaded inside the basement of their house with 6 children, police tear-gassed the home and flooded the basement with water. But that wasn't all. Police had planned on bombing the house well in advance, and during the siege, using a state police helicopter, Philadelphia police dropped a gym bag with 37 pounds of C4 explosive on the Move house and detonated it. The resulting explosion set off a fire that engulfed the home. Police fired upon people as they attempted to leave the house to keep them trapped inside as the building burned to the ground. The fire department turned off their hoses and allowed the Move house and the surrounding homes to burn down. In the end, the damage toll was tremendous. 62 homes destroyed, 6 adults killed, 5 children dead, 1 mayor black.
He was the mayor at the time. And whether he actually gave the order or not is kind of irrelevant. You're the leader of the city. You were in on it no matter how you want to look at it. And if you were not personally guilty, you certainly didn't name any people who were. So as far as I'm concerned, it's you. Okay, he's since become a preacher now. I guess he's trying to save his soul after what he participated in.
If Wilson Good is in need of absolution, he'll have plenty of company at the altar of repentance among his fellow first black mayors. Tom Bradley was the first black mayor of Los Angeles, home of America's most notoriously violent police department. A former police officer himself, Bradley had plenty of opportunity to fix the problem since he was elected to office 5 times, serving for 20 years. And under his administration, the LA Police Department gained such an infamous record for police brutality and violence, it was single-handedly responsible for spawning a new music genre, gangster rap. In 1978, Moon Landrieu was the last white mayor elected in New Orleans. That year, Dutch Morial became New Orleans' first black mayor. He would serve until 1986. 8 years later, Dutch Morial's son, Mark Morial, would be elected mayor. During the time the Morials were in office, New Orleans, which could have become the next black mecca after Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, instead became the murder capital of the United States. Which wasn't surprising, since after Hurricane Katrina, it was revealed to the world it was the most desperately poor major city in the United States. 8 years after Mark Morial left office, followed by Ray Nagin, the people of New Orleans decided to end the era of black mayoral leadership and chose a career politician they felt they could trust. Mitch Landrieu, the son of the last white mayor of New Orleans, Moon Landrieu. The irony here isn't even vague. same thing in Detroit. Just like in Atlanta, New Orleans, and Los Angeles, in 1974, Detroit celebrated the beginning of black mayoral leadership under Coleman Young. All the while, we failed to notice the deadly indicators of crime, unemployment, education, and poor housing. All the things exacerbated by poverty never moved. In 1950, Detroit had a population of 1.84 million. Today, its population is around 700,000. And in the 34 years of black mayor leadership from Coleman Young to the now infamous Kwame Kilpatrick, our black politicians squandered every conceivable opportunity imaginable to resurrect Detroit. And by July 2013, their malfeasance ultimately drove the city into the largest municipal bankruptcy filing in American history. The city was placed under the control of a state-appointed emergency finance manager who has autocratic control of the city's day-to-day operations. After all of this, it wasn't surprising when in November 2013, following the lead of New Orleans, voters in Detroit opted to repeal the era of black mayors and elected their first white mayor in almost 4 decades. Across the country, the clock is literally turning backwards. What we've learned during our 60-year grand experiment with politics is we can elect all the black politicians we want. We can have a majority black population and even a majority black government, and nothing will change. Without money, your people have no power, and without power, your vote is meaningless. No sport in America of the last 100 years became a major international event until black men became a part of it. And this has always frustrated black people because we've always known that while most of the people playing pro sports are black, practically all of the people who own pro sports are white. Since their large paychecks are not controlled by the black community and don't benefit anyone but themselves, we don't even count professional athletes as progress.
Somebody asked me one time, said, Dr. Hess, what would be the impact of people like, wouldn't it hurt black folk if Oprah, Tiger Woods lost their money? No, it wouldn't. Wouldn't damage blacks 1 iota. Black people in general could care less. You know why? They're not connected to the black community. If they got money, all they got these billions of dollars, and none of it helped elevate the quality of life for their own people. If they lost it, didn't make any difference to black folk. It didn't make any difference when they had it to black folk. Won't make any difference when they lose it.
LeBron James, his marketing, okay? He's a rich young man. But what he's making isn't even half of what the executives of the Miami Heat are making.
Why can't LeBron and the 19 best players just go start their own league? All they have to do is book venues to play in. Everyone pays to see the superstars. So you put 2 superstars on 10 teams and then you put a team together with, they're great players everywhere. But my point is, because for whatever reason, understanding that true wealth is created from owning assets is something that we as a people haven't really grasped very well.
Our athletes and entertainers don't have sizable amounts of wealth. They may own their home, but that's about it. They're not major traders in wealth. Oprah's not a major trader in wealth. Bob Johnson, LeBron, Jay-Z, these folks are not major traders in wealth. They have lots of money, but where's the assets?
But black people did own their own major league sports organization, and the story of the Negro Leagues is as compelling as it is all too familiar.
When we talk about the Negro Leagues, there are actually multiple Negro Leagues that were run by different groups of owners.
Okay, that's it with that. I wanted to really give a good background that would really look at what I'm dealing with today. Now, one of our most well-renowned and respected historians, Dr. John Henry Clark, wrote a book that came out in 1991 called African World Revolution. Subtitle, Africans at the Crossroads. And in the book, he said, education is one of the most sensitive arenas in the area of a people. Its role is to be honest and true, to tell a people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important though, the role of education is to tell a people where they have been and what they have been, where they must go and what they must do. Now he also quoted something in his book from Timothy Callender called The Basis of African Culture, where he said, what we do for ourselves depends on what we know of ourselves and what we accept about ourselves. Now I wanted to say those two quotes before I go on with my presentation, because we have to understand that as a people in America, if we do not take the leadership role in creating businesses that will in turn help us create communities for our survival as a people, then our situation is going to get even worse. So I've started that process that many others have already begun in building and creating businesses where we can begin to become self-sufficient and independent. But we can't do that if we don't have the kind of support for the businesses in order for them to grow and expand. And I'm talking about even your own family members, because that's where it's supposed to really start at, with your family members. We have people that would rather go out and purchase items from other people rather than buy it from their own. Now I spoke about in one of the videos, in the series of videos that I've already done, how we are affected by the false information, miseducation, and indoctrination. We function on that on a daily basis. And what that means is that we act based upon what we've been conditioned and programmed to do. And if that's not clear enough for you, then let me give some examples of what I'm talking about. We live in areas and neighborhoods, because it's not communities. Last week I spoke about what defines a community. And I mentioned that communities are defined by you controlling the economics of that community, you having the say so, you building the businesses, you having the ownership of everything that exists in that community. That's what makes up a community. So we live in neighborhoods and areas, but we don't live in communities because we don't own communities. The way that you begin the process of owning communities is by first establishing businesses. If we don't establish businesses, then we will not be able to have communities. It starts off with establishing businesses. That's why I played that in the beginning before I started my presentation, so that you can see that many of the people who have already established businesses understand the importance of how businesses play a key role in everything else you do. That's why Timothy Callender said, in the basis of African culture, what we do for ourselves depends on what we know of ourselves and what we accept about ourselves. And John Henry Clark said, education is one of the most sensitive arenas in the life of a people. Its role is to be honest and true, to tell the people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important though, the role of education is to tell the people where they still must go and what they still must be. We have to understand the important lessons that many of the people in our history that came before us gave us before they left. Because their lives and their struggles in America for independence and self-development have left lessons for us to learn from. If we fail to learn from those lessons, then we will repeat the same cycle of failure in history that we've repeated all these years. We can't wait for others to decide to change our conditions, because that's not going to happen. We have to change those conditions. And it starts with ownership, creating businesses. We won't be able to do that if we don't think along the lines of creating businesses. We have to first change our way of thinking. If we do not change our way of thinking, change our behavior, change our values, morals, and principles, we won't be able to do that. We have to first attack the way we think. We have to create different values, morals, and principles. We have to change our behavior, the way we act at home and abroad. We have to change the whole thing about that. If we do not do that, we will fail to change our conditions. Now, you have many of us that still believe that education is the key to success in America, which is a false notion, because you have many people that are educated, but yet they're not successful in America. So don't believe that when you see blacks in America that have went to the best colleges and universities, they hold some of the prominent positions in society. Look at the percentage of blacks that still live in poverty, still suffer every day, still go from day to day to try to make ends meet. The large percentage of young black women with children that are struggling every day. Single mothers. And I don't even like to use that term, single mothers. But the reality is that it is a term that has been used by the media so much that many of the young mothers really see themselves as single mothers. You often hear them speak from the perspective of a single mother because they have begun to define themselves how society has defined them. So that's why I said we have to change the way we think, because our perception of ourselves reinforces the stereotypes that they have really given us. So we have to change our way of thinking. We have to look at ourselves beyond the way that they have conditioned us to think and behave. We can't do that until we first change our way of thinking, or we will continue to define ourselves and behave the way that they have conditioned us to. Many years ago, I realized that. That's why I got knowledge of self. I changed my way of thinking, changed my behavior, because I knew that once I did all of that, it would change me as an individual, as a person, and as a human being. I could never have done that had I not recognized that there was a problem with the way I thought, the way I act, my behavior, my values, my morals, and my principles. I had to first recognize that there was a problem. If I couldn't see that, then I wouldn't have never went on the journey of the transformation of myself. And I'm saying that we need to look at that as individuals before we even start thinking on a collective basis, black people as a whole. We cannot do that if we don't want to at least acknowledge or recognize that there is a problem, that we need to look at it first, that there's a problem. And then second, we need to focus on how do we now change what has happened to us. We can't do that if we don't want to even acknowledge it. And if we can't see it. And I know that this is hard because many of us are still victims of the false information, the miseducation, and the indoctrination. So I know this is a hard process. But I know that we can do this if we really want to change our conditions. Because the future of the next generation will largely depend upon what we do in this generation. Let me say that again. Because the future of the next generation will largely depend upon what we do in this generation. And each generation has an obligation and a responsibility to secure for the next generation their future. We can't do that if we don't do anything in our generation. It would make it even harder for them to do something in the next generation. With all of what we know, all of what we experienced, all of what we went through as individuals in our lives, we need to start focusing on how do we become instruments of change so that we can, in turn, change what has happened to us so that it will not happen to the future generations. But we can't begin that process if we do not start with ourselves. Now there's many that have already begun the process, but it's not enough. We can do better. We have over 43 million black people in America. And over 1 billion of us all around the world. But let's focus right here in America. With the over 43 million people in America, and we spend estimated of $1 trillion a year, where is that money going? Because we don't have it, so where is it going? I'll tell you where it's going. It's going to all those who have businesses in America that are enriching themselves off of the money that we spend. All the ethnic groups, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Asian people, the Jews, the Italians, all of these people are enriching themselves off of our money and all the goods and services that they provide for us as consumers. We know this because every day we spend money, and we spend it on the goods and services that we don't own or control. So that means that others own and control these goods and services. We don't have a hand in that. But their hand is out for our money. So we need to start really looking at how we can change that, where it will be able to benefit us as a people. Now, my online baby store, selling baby clothes, is one of the ways to begin that process. I am one of the ones that have seen the problem and now is doing something about it. But I can't do that without the support from y'all, the people. As I stated last week, you're going to buy stuff anyway. So why not buy it from your own people? Now in the future, I'm going to add more items on the list of the website. This week, I'm going to start selling shirts, t-shirts with Baby Beautiful symbol on it. That is in the background where you see you have the baby there and you have the baby there. Now you have in the background, you got two. You have up here and then you have down below. That symbol is looked upon as the logo for babybeautiful.co. So the t-shirts will have that logo, the picture of the baby, and it will have a statement. That statement will be what will represent babybeautiful.co company. I will be adding that t-shirt to the list of the website. It will cost $15 to purchase the t-shirt. Each purchase of that t-shirt will link you as being a part of the family of babybeautiful.co. I want the t-shirts to become a part of our clothing line where we will not only sell baby clothes, but people will be wearing the logo of the website, babybeautiful.co. That will help to get the message out more to more people. Because we have to start having something of our own. Where when we see that logo, we know that that is linked to babybeautiful.co. So we have to start establishing our own rather than running around buying everything that other people establish. I walk in the street every day and it's not very many youth and older people for that matter that I see that don't have a pair of Jordans on. Now, although Jordan is a black man, in fact, me and Jordan was birthed on the same day, the same month. But that fact in itself doesn't mean anything to me. And the fact that he's a black man, that doesn't mean anything to him either. Because he has not done anything to support black people. Now he's out of the NBA, been out of the NBA for years. But people continue to buy his sneakers. And this man has done nothing for black people in America. But he's getting very rich off of selling his sneakers. You have the average youth walking in the street. They wearing Jordans. Because they are victims of the media brainwashing them to believe that if you don't wear these, you're not in. See, this is how they market to us as a people. They tell us what to wear in footwear and clothing. And we go in accordance with that. Because we don't produce our own footwear, we don't produce our own clothing, so we go in accordance with that. We are conditioned to act, think, and behave a certain way. Let me say that again. We are conditioned to act, think, and behave a certain way. And it's normal to us. We don't see that as something wrong. We've been conditioned to act, think, and behave a certain way. So when we buy the Jordans, that's out of conditioning. Remember I said, change the way you think. Change your values, your morals, your principles, your behavior. That's the only way we can change our conditions. Because what we do is as a result of our state of condition. We think, act, and behave according to our condition. If we didn't have the condition that we have, then we would not act, think, and behave the way that we do. And this is not restricted to just black people in America who are not conscious. It also applies to those who claim to be conscious. I see many brothers and sisters that they claim to have all this knowledge and consciousness and all that, but they still are affected by the conditioning because they act, think, and behave a certain way too. They buy the same items too. I'm saying I see older people wearing Jordans. Not just young people, older people wearing Jordans. So this is not something that is just young people. No, it's not just restricted to them. So let's not make it appear that just young people are doing this. No, you have a lot of older people that are doing it out of conditioning too. And I'm saying all of that is as a result of the way we think, our values, our morals, our principles. The fact that we are still suffering from false information, indoctrination, and miseducation. We have to look at that because it is something that affects our everyday life. It has become a normality, meaning that it's normal, something that is normal. We don't question it because we are conditioned to act, think, and believe a certain way. How can you question it when you've been conditioned to act, think, and believe a certain way? So you don't question it. No. This is something that I think we need to really seriously look at as individuals in our own individual life. Because this affects what we do as a people in our own lives as individuals and as a collective. You know, I speak about, as I spoke about in the last video, about the young mothers and fathers, about the bad choices and decisions that they have made and continue to make. But they're not, that's not just restricted to them. I've made bad choices and decisions way before them. So I'm not speaking about something that did not affect me. No, I'm speaking about it because I know from experience. Way before they started making their bad choices and decisions, I made mine. And many others that come from the same era that I come from have done the same. So I don't want you to think that I'm sitting here as someone who have always made all of the right decisions and choices. No. That would be far from the truth. I would not even project that kind of image because I was a mess. I come from a background in history where I made all of the wrong choices. And as a result of that, those wrong choices cost me 25 years in the prison system. Yes, 25 years in the prison system. Because I fell in line with the street life, the crime, the drugs, the alcohol, all of that. I fell in line with all that. Yeah, I was a victim of all that. So when I speak to you, I don't speak from the perspective of someone who always did the right thing, always had everything correct, and always made the right decisions. No. I speak from this perspective of someone who did all the wrong things, made all the bad decisions. And as a result of that, it cost me 25 years in the prison system. So, I am not speaking to you from someone who have always did the right thing. No. And I think that that is very important. That's why I mentioned it. Because now today, I want you to see that I'm a prime example of what not to do. My life experience speaks for itself. But now today when I speak to you, it's coming from a perspective of making all those bad decisions and doing all that time in the prison system. So I want you to see that when I started this online baby store, babybeautiful.co, I was coming from that background. All of that history, knowledge and experience. So I'm not just someone who just decided that I was going to do an online baby store. No. My history, knowledge, and experience is what pushed me to do that. And I have a wealth of that. Unfortunately, as a result of going through all of that in my own life. So I want you to understand when I speak about these things, it's not from the perspective of just sitting down and reading and studying things, although I did that too. But it is really from my own personal experiences. Yeah, I've studied, researched, and read a whole lot. Well, I had a lot of time to do it. 25 years. I should have been doing something. And as a result of that, I'm bringing all of that to the online baby store with me. And that's why I said, not only do I have the online baby store, but I have a message. And that message is clear, clearly defined. And it is consistent with my way of life. Save the babies, they're the greatest. I know that because I wasn't saved as a baby. That's why I went through all of the different trials and tribulations that I went through. Because I wasn't saved as a baby. So now I am on this mission to save as many babies as I can possibly do. And I'm asking you to join me in doing that by supporting the online baby store. Your support will help me to make this a household name and a living reality to us as a people, so that we can begin to build communities, not just populate areas and live in neighborhoods where we don't own anything or control anything. I'm saying this is the beginning stage. Let's do this as a people. Let's support the online baby store to take things to the next level. If we don't do it, then it won't get done. We have to do it. The change starts with us, and it starts now. Not tomorrow, or next week or next year. It starts now. So I spoke about in one of the videos, if there's items that you don't see listed on the website, you can call me or email me with your suggestions. And if I find that those suggestions are good, then I will add other items to the list of the website. But you have to become actively involved, not just sitting on the sidelines watching. No, be a part of the process. It's going to start with you. I've already begun. Now it's your turn. So with that, I'm going to say peace. And next week, I will deal with another video in the series of videos that I've already stated that I will be dealing with for BabyBeautiful.co. Peace.